serious. People who have been guests on reality shows, such as remodeling, weight loss, pawn shows. What really went on? Story 1. I am sure it will be disappointing and not at all surprising to hear that Antiques Roadshow is pretty much like it looks. Our dusty crap was not selected for a special segment, but we did have our items appraised. They filmed the segments right out in the middle of where everyone is lined up waiting, so you get to see it unfold. The one thing they don't show is how much research the appraisers do. I mean, sometimes they'll say on TV, I did some research, or I consulted with colleagues. But I think most times a viewer might come away with the impression that the appraisers clap eyes on a piece and immediately understand its significance. But generally, they have a laptop and some reference books to turn to, as well as memberships on the fine arts auction sites, which show prices realized in previous sales. Also, I was a volunteer on a short-lived makeover show called School Pride, where they renovated public schools. I worked several days and nights at the Detroit area school that they made over. I don't know if it was because the show was new or what, but it did not seem very organized. And a lot of the student volunteers on site didn't have enough to do because no one had a plan for them. I think they must have made a monster effort in the last few days. When the segment aired, they showed some very industrious-looking work sessions, and those weren't going on at all when I was there. Nice people, though. I'm not sure the producer on site ever got much sleep. Story 2. Got paid $50 to go on Hardcore Pawn to be called gay. But when not on camera, Les seemed like a pretty cool dude. Late to the party here, but I have a relevant story. I live near Detroit and had an old ozone-generating air purifier called a Home for sale on Craigslist that I picked up at a garage sale because it looked cool. I got a call from a production company in California that asked if I'd be interested in appearing on Hardcore Pawn. The shop is only a few miles from my house for a chance to sell my item. They offered me $50 for my appearance, and I could keep any money that was offered by the shop. I decided to accept, so they gave me a date and a time to show up. The place was packed because they shoot the whole season in a couple of days and then fly back to California. First, I did a brief interview with the camera outside the shop about what I was bringing and how much I wanted for it. Then, I was ushered inside, where they took my item and told me to wait until I was called up. After browsing for a while, I was called up by one of the assistants, and they brought me to the counter where the main guy, Les Gold, with the ponytail, was standing. We talked for a bit, and he asked me about where I was from and explained how the bartering would work. Once the introductions were out of the way, the cameras go on, and he put on his TV character. He seemed like a really nice guy when we were talking, but a little sleazy when in character. Mainly the bartering process consisted of him making gay jokes about the name of my purifier and insinuating that I may be a homosexual. He made me an offer for $5, and I turned it down, then went on my way with the $50 from the production company. I don't have cable, so I've never watched the show, but my parents watch it and have not seen me on it yet. Story 3. I was on Made, an MTV show about turning nerds into pickup artists or charming people or whatever term suits your fancy. Well, technically, rather, I was at a party being hosted for the main star of the show. My family and I happened to be vacationing at the Atlantis Resort in Nassau, an island in the Bahamas, when we heard about MTV hosting a party, and 15-year-old me figured it would be fun to go. As I walked through the entrance to the party, I saw a pretty girl on a seat in the corner. I asked her what she was doing, and she said something along the lines of, "They asked me to wait here." From being at the party and later watching on TV, I learned that this was the girl that the star of the show got to go on a date with. In other words, MTV spoon-fed a date to a guy on a show about how to get a date. I can't blame the girl for agreeing to do it. She got to be on TV, and all she had to do was go to a nice dinner by the dolphin enclosure with a fat nerd. Not the most exciting thing in the world, but confirmed to me that yes, reality TV is as fixed as everyone believes. Story 4. It's not exactly billed as a reality show, but I was on MythBusters. They had a survey linked on their Facebook page for you to be a volunteer. It asked a bunch of seemingly random questions, I guess to make sure they got a good spread of people across a wide variety of different myths to test. I signed up, got an email saying that they would be in some industrial part of San Francisco, and then another email saying it had been canceled. A few days after that, I got another email offering a different position, this time at 10 in the morning in a nightclub with business casual clothing specified. No information about what the myth actually is. I show up in the nightclub and I'm waiting around for about an hour or so before things actually happen. In the meantime, other volunteers show up, and it's all dudes. I think to myself that it's just the sort of demographic that would want to sign up for a MythBusters myth, or because this is the Bay Area. A lot of them also happen to be engineers. But once someone comes over and directs us to the restaurant next door, I see girls seated at little tables around the room and realize it's a speed dating myth, and they're keeping the guys and girls separate. When we go in, the director or some guy tells us what's going to happen, what Jamie's going to say, and then we have to step out of the restaurant so we can step back in while the cameras are rolling. We go in, Jamie and Adam have a bit of a rehearsed intro, and then Jamie messes up, and we have to go out and back in again so he can redo it. Once that's all done, we get down to the mock speed dating. Essentially real speed dating, just that no actual exchange of contact info occurs. I have a few awkward conversations with the girls. The awkwardness was compounded by the fact there was a camera 3 feet to my right that I had to avoid looking at while trying to hold a conversation. At one point, after filling out my little rating card, the camera guy asked me to act as if I'm filling it out again so he can get a close-up shot. I should note that although there was a bit at the beginning where Jamie and Adam talk, we were never explicitly told what the myth was. I did notice that some of the girls' hair looked a little weird though, and when we were taken back to the nightclub afterward for debriefing, the guys concluded that it must have had something to do with testing hair color. We then had individual exit interviews, we took the group picture that you see above, and then I was on my way. There was a separate set of people in the afternoon, and they mixed both groups' footage for the show, so I barely even show up. The clear shot of me is off my back as the camera is focused on the girl I'm talking to. Story 5. I was on an episode of TLC's Take Home Chef, Season 2. For those who haven't seen it, the premise is that a woman, usually, I think it changed a bit in later seasons, is picked up by Chef Curtis Stone while shopping in the grocery store. He comes home with her to flirt a little and cook and get a mini makeover. And then they surprise her significant other with a fancy meal. Except they don't really pick you up on that day. I was approached by a casting director in the grocery store, true, but they scheduled me to return a couple of days later when they would find me there. It gives you those couple of days to really make sure your kitchen is clean enough to be on TV. I imagine the rate of refusal if they wanted to come film your house right that second is probably really high. And you have to make sure your significant other will be home in time for dinner. They also talk to you about food preferences and interests so they can make the storyline and recipes. Anyway, they told me to show up with no makeup, looking like I just came from yoga or something. So I did just that. When the director saw me, the first words were, "That's great. No one ever listens to us, and they always come dressed to the nines." Otherwise, it was pretty much exactly as shown. Just a very long, but fun day. If you wonder if Curtis Stone can cook, he definitely can. The food was delicious. He didn't really flirt much with me though, and I asked one of the crew about it because I'm not ugly or anything, and I was looking pretty cute after hair and makeup had gotten to me. And she told me that because of some funny, snappy comebacks when we first met in the store, he thought I was a little intimidating. So I missed out on some hot Aussie action. Damn. The only scripted moment was when they had me call my husband in the middle of the day. I never, ever call him for no reason at work. So the conversation was super awkward. Curtis Stone washed the dishes himself in the sink while we ate, on camera, which is also pretty uncomfortable and funny at the same time. Story 6. I was on America's Got Talent, AGT, though my segment didn't air. I was asked via a message from AGT through my YouTube account to come to their nearest tryouts in Minneapolis. I went. When I showed up, there was a huge mob of people in the event center waiting in lines where they were auditioning, trying to get noticed, as the show is known. What hit me like a ton of bricks was that none of these people were invited and were likely never going to have a chance. I was invited and scheduled because I had a really stupid talent and a popular YouTube video. I skipped the lines entirely and felt really wrong about it. I felt sad for the mass of people, some of whom were legit desperate, thinking this was going to be their big break. I got brought to a special waiting room with a bunch of other invited people. Everyone in this waiting room was practicing, dancing, and singing, and whatever. And they were all really, really talented. Then it hit me. I was invited on to be the comic relief. Some producers walked in and talked to us. Then they took us down to the waiting room one by one and instructed us to act like we'd been waiting in the line the whole time. and we had coached interviews in the big waiting area with everyone else. I gave my story. They took it and had some funny ideas and asked me to give the story again, coaching me to say certain things differently, yada yada. In the end, they were things that I would have never said on my own. It seemed like they wanted to have this big, serious buildup when all my talent was this weird, stupid little thing. I'll say what it is at the end of the story. So then they take me around to do some escalator shots, walking into the waiting room shots, practicing in front of a mirror stuff. Then they're like, good luck, and bring me back to the special waiting room, and they would take the next person. Then I go into an audition room with a couple of annoyed people on laptops and a camera, and I do my thing, answer one or two questions, and then I go home. They called me like a month or two later and said they wanted me on the stage taping with the celebrities. I say sure. I got to Minneapolis again. It was a 5-hour drive and they offered to pay for my travel. Got work off and went through blizzard conditions, and Pierce couldn't make it. I don't really care. I just like getting time off from work to travel, and I thought it would make a neat story. They do a bunch of fake shots of excitement, cheering, clapping. They tell us this will change our lives. We waited around forever because Pierce wasn't going to make it on time. He ends up not making it. They go on with the show with just Sharon and that bald germaphobe. They get the crowd ready. They tell them how to act. The show starts, and we're all down in a basement waiting to go up. Nick Cannon is forced to socialize with weird people and narcissistic kids who don't know that no one gives a crap and are annoying. I seriously felt bad for Nick having to act happy and excited all freaking day. The dude must be miserable inside. I walk upstairs because I'm on deck, and they hand me a wireless microphone that turns on when I flip the switch. I'm standing behind the curtain. The person ahead of me is this beautiful opera singing black chick with white braids singing immaculately. They call me on, and I enter stage right. They ask where I'm from and a few other things. Then I say I hold the record for the world's longest burp. I say, hold on. I start swallowing air, one gulp at a time. They make fun of it, as celebrities do. I start pumping myself so fucking full of air. They make a joke about me exploding. Hurts so much. I burp and say the ABCs 5 times in one burp. I get both X's, and if Pierce would have been there, I would have gotten the 3rd. I leave. Before I do, the producers have me burp in Nick Cannon's face right before he waves the air away and says they're going to commercial break. This was the best part of my day. Story 7. I was on a show called Takeshi's Castle on the TBS television network in Japan years ago. The premise of the show was to run contestants through a series of obstacles, eliminating all but 5 or 6 who, at the end of the show, rode around in little buggies and tried to hit a target with a laser. The first contestant to hit the target won some ridiculous amount of money. I think it was the yen equivalent of around 10,000 US dollars. I didn't get that far, having been eliminated from one of the earlier obstacles. My group of contestants showed up on taping day early in the morning. We were issued red plastic bike helmets and told to bring a change of clothes due to some of the obstacles being wet and or muddy. As I recall, the obstacles on our show were a mass obstacle course with a high wall with doors, with only some of the doors being able to be opened, huge rotating cylinders over which the contestants had to run. This was my good friend's Waterloo, as he fell off the top of the last drum into the mud and water below. A rotating surfboard on a long pole over a tank of water. You had to jump over stuffed obstacles or move them out of the way as you circled the tank. There was a platform halfway around where you had to jump up, then run to the opposite side and jump back onto the surfboard as it continued to the end. This was my Waterloo, as I fell off the surfboard while trying to get back on it. A long rope bridge with about a 150-foot span. You had to run from one end to the other, with people on the ground shooting soccer balls at you with air cannons. A long body of water with stones, which you had to jump from stone to cross. Most of the stones were solid, while some of them were just light rubber that would sink if you stepped on them, dropping you into the water. All of the contestants received a nominal appearance fee, the equivalent of around $25 US if I remember. They also fed us lunch, sushi and sashimi of course, and soft drinks, except for a very tall German-looking lady who was beat Takeshi's assistant and our talent coordinator. None of the show's main cast spoke a word of English. All in all, I wouldn't have missed it for the world, and I had a great time. I even got to keep my helmet. Story 8. I worked on one of the final Extreme Home Makeover episodes, the 7 in 7 episode, where we built 7 houses in 7 days in Joplin, MO, after a huge tornado wiped out a lot of the city. The construction crews were all run by local general contractors, and their teams donated their own time, which was really awesome. None of the hosts did any of the real work. They just did a few things for cameras. Ty Pennington was a huge douchebag and a diva. He only came out of his lavish tour bus for a few minutes at a time to shoot his scenes. The week of the shoot, he went and got belligerent drunk at a bar in town and made an ass of himself. Oh yeah, the house I was working on was framed with 8D nails. I wasn't part of the framing crew. The inspector never said anything. Story 9. Did the Home Makeover show when it was in Philly. The neighbors make out great. Some of the neighbors were sent away on trips too, so we could take over their yards for storage and setting up cabinet shop. They also received free furniture. And the surrounding neighborhood can go to the hospitality area and eat some free food. But, as others have stated, the construction is horrible. They use leaf blowers and hair dryers to get the joint compound to dry faster. After the show aired, the bed that could lower into the floor was permanently disabled because someone could get crushed under it. House was robbed a week after the show aired, and the family ended up moving 5 years later, which I heard is the amount of time you agree to not sell the house as a condition of being on the show. Story 10. I realize I'm late to the party, but my family's house was featured on a season of This Old House. The biggest thing in terms of what really went on is that we were very cautious, and rightly so, about the promise of any free stuff. Unlike some other shows, on This Old House, we paid the full price for them to do the construction, basically on a contractor basis. But the show does have certain materials that get donated as part of advertising and sponsorship relationships. Now, when that stuff is donated, it's free for the show, but it gets taxed as a gift to the people receiving it, i.e., us. So my parents were very cautious in terms of working with an accountant, and particularly at the design stage, to make sure that what the architect was proposing wouldn't bankrupt us. Some of the previous old houses had some horror stories that we'd heard rumors about on that front. The advantage from our perspective wasn't that it was any cheaper. It was that A, the contractor team was exceptionally good, and B, that everything would get done on time. And that was certainly worth it. As for the reality aspect, well, I don't think This Old House tries to go in for the drama as much as other reality shows. But they did feed my parents lines about the construction. My parents are not DIY people. So when they're talking about switches and wood grain and all this other stuff, that was fed to them. All in all, a great experience. And we're still in touch with some of them. Roger Cook, in particular, is awesome. Story 11. Might be late to the game here, but I was on Miami Ink. Actually, my wife got a tattoo and I was the person there for support. I was on the show for a bit and got to meet most of the cast. Weird parts were how the show was not exactly scripted, but they had a set plan on what they wanted to do and got people to fit the idea they had. We had to pay for all our expenses and pay for the tattoo. It was a pretty expensive tattoo, over $800. I was told that was standard, unless it was a special case. All the cast members I met were Garver, Darren Brass, and Yoji Harada. Were really cool guys. Amy was not on our episode, but was there. He was a little standoffish and refused to sign the Miami Ink book I had brought and didn't want to take a pic with us. He just came off as really rude. Other guys being so cool made up for it. This was right after the season where they had a lot of fights with Kat, but Kat was not there. I asked them if the fights on the show with Kat were real, and they kind of gave me some looks and said that most of the fighting was real. Kat and Amy apparently didn't get along in real life as well. It was an overall cool experience, but it was annoying that we had to pay for the tattoo and all expenses to be on a show that makes money. The episode was titled No Regrets. Story 12. I was signed by Discovery for a reality show that was filmed, but last minute, I got cut. There were 4 groups from all over the US that were filmed. We all were owners of a business in a specific niche, wildlife control. After filming with them, I quit watching reality TV. I realized just how fake everything is. We were filming at night on 2 small boats. We were attempting to move an iguana from a tree about 20 feet in the air. It jumped and dove into the water, just missing our net. The producer calls for one of the boats to come ashore and get a log he found. He proceeds to coach his personal assistant on how to throw the log up in the air and into the net that was sitting at the water level. All he said to the cameraman was, "You know what to do," or something along those lines. I have other stories, like how they made me film with a dead animal and had me interact with it and move it as if it were alive. Story 13. I was an on-air carpenter for Bravo's show Top Design, Season 1, and did 9 episodes. It was awesome. Basically, I was the grunt doing all the building and carpentry for the designer architect. I met a load of cool people, many of whom I'm still in touch with today. It was a brutal schedule, though, as we did a show every 4 days, basically. We'd work from noon till midnight the first day, usually planning and getting materials. The show was mostly in the Pacific Design Center in LA, and we'd have to hit Home Depot for materials, then load it all into trucks and an elevator and cart it onto the set. Then we'd work from 7 a.m. till midnight the next day, building the projects. The last day was from 7 a.m. till 2 to 3 p.m., when you'd wrap up the builds and the designers would wait for judging. The next day, you'd have off to sleep and recover. I didn't see as much of LA in those 6 weeks as I'd thought. After finding out if your designer got the boot or not, you'd be back at it again. Got to meet some cool people in the fashion and design world. Margaret Russell, editor of Elle Decor, Todd Oldham, Jonathan Adler, and Kelly Wurstler. So that was fun as well. As far as scripting or manipulation, the producers didn't do any of that. Not on our end, at least. We made stuff in the time they gave us, with real budgets. The first time we built stuff, it was like, I'm gonna glue and screw this together real good. All professional and such. Then you see the production assistants tossing your hard work into a dumpster at the end of the day. By the last show, everything was barely held together with a few 18-gauge brad nails. Margaret Russell went to sit on a canopy bed I made, and I grabbed her, yelling, "Don't sit on that!" as she would have promptly eaten crap and destroyed the whole bed.